being Greenwich Village Society members. We rely on your support. We can't do it without you, and we thank you. That's why we love to do these special members-only programs. Tonight is very special indeed. I'm going to stop talking and turn it over to our host this evening, Tim McDarrah. The format will be Tim will speak a little bit. He will introduce our very special guest for the evening, who will take us on a brief tour of the gallery and some of her favorite images here tonight. And then they're going to very graciously open it up to your questions. So we'll be here till 7 o'clock. Let's make the most of it. I give you now Mr. Tim McDarrah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Greetings. The first and most important thing, under that exit sign, the first door to the right is a unisex restroom. So if you need to use the restroom at any time during this, feel free to walk right over and go in. And also, there's another opening of a different show in the back. You're welcome to go look at that at any point. In the other room, there's a table with wine and snacks. You're all welcome to have a little bit, but not too much. Anyway, this is my mom, Gloria McDarrah. Very briefly, she was born in the Bronx. Her family moved south when she was in elementary school to 3rd Street and 1st Avenue, where she went to elementary school. It was the Depression. Her father got a job in Pennsylvania. The family moved to Pennsylvania. She went to Penn State University. The moment the ink started to dry on her diploma, she came back to New York. She was working at a place called Metro Sunday Newspapers, and they were hiring a messenger. And one potential employee had stapled his photograph onto his resume. My mother said, "He's cute, we should hire him." It became my dad. That was in 1954. They lived in Sin until they got married in 1960. Wonderful. That's what they did. And they spent the latter part of the 50s going to events like she's going to talk about today. I don't think they had much of an idea of who any of these people would be or what the movements would become. But they would go to poetry readings with Ginsberg and Kerouac and Corso and Burroughs. They'd go to art openings with de Kooning and Klein. And now it's name dropping, but then that was just what people did. It was a very different world. My dad had met in Cape Cod a man named Bill Littlefield, who was a painter. He worked with a sculptor named Philip Pavia, and they had started something called The Club, which was an artist discussion group, which is where a lot of these pictures and events took place. Eventually, my dad stumbled onto one of his neighbors who was starting a newspaper called The Village Voice. He knew my dad could talk and sell ads. He knew my dad had a camera, and my dad eventually signed on with The Voice, where he stayed for 50 years. My mother is a very assertive person. She was not a 50s Eisenhower housewife. She went with my dad to all these events. She worked her entire life. My dad, who had the non-9-to-5 job as a photographer, would pick my brother and I up from school, bring us to PS41. My mother always worked. She went to the events. She was an equal participant in all the books that they did. There were several of them they did. The Beat Scene, The Artist's World, Beat Generation, Glory Days at Greenwich Village, museums in New York, and so on. And it became history. My dad didn't consider himself an artist or historian, but as evidenced by the show, the attention the show's got and what some of these people now mean to our culture, that's how it evolved. Gloria is going to go through the show, pointing out some pictures that are of interest to her. Hopefully they're of interest to you. As Ted said, when you're done and as we're going on, you're welcome to ask questions, share your own thoughts and experiences about the whole thing, and ask anything you need to know. Anyway, Gloria McDarrah.
Thank you.
I've lived in the village since 1953, and in Soho, before it was Soho, when it was still where the rag trade and so on, but now live between Bleecker and Houston on LaGuardia Place. Fred was very interested in the avant-garde and in people who followed their own strange impulses to make works. He took me to the Artists Club meeting in 1956. And the topic of discussion of that meeting was the death of Jackson Pollock, who had died in August. And this was in the fall. and how the art world would go on without this towering figure. And I hardly knew who Jackson Pollock was, but I gradually became as fascinated by the whole milieu. I don't know if artists today have that kind of community. Maybe I'm out of it. I'm too old for
Bushwick.
Bushwick. There you go. Exactly. But you know, there are people. There were musicians like Morty Feldman or Philip Glass. They would come to club meetings, and dancers would come to club meetings. It was like the whole world of Greenwich Village. Creativity was represented there, and it was just amazing. And here we go to these photographs on this wall are all in this book, The Artist's World. It covers pretty much what was going on in Greenwich Village, and to some extent Provincetown in the late 50s, early 60s. In his studio on 14th Street, and this is the studio where Arshile Gorky had worked before Klein got it. And I don't know who has it now, but, and this is a gallery, the Brada, that was in Provincetown. Fred also liked to photograph studios. I don't know if any of you have seen, there's an exhibit at the Gagosian in Chelsea. It's called In the Studio, and it's like a museum show showing their paintings from the 1700s on up through de Kooning of artists either in their studios or how they painted their studios. It's the Gagosian, and I know there are two of them in Chelsea, but the exhibit is called In the Studio.
It's over. It came down. He has a Ty Twombly show right now.
Yeah, it was fascinating. Picture of a softball game. At bat is Franz Klein, and that's Alex Katz, who I think got him out at first base.
And that evolved into the Artist and Writer softball game, which is in East Hampton now that people may read about. That was the first incarnations of it.
Yes, that's true. And this is Robert Rauschenberg of Weitschik. You'd hardly recognize him. He had a loft on North Moore Street, which now I guess would be Tribeca. Yeah. And there was no furniture, hardly any furniture. I don't know. I don't think he ever sat down. Or maybe I was more conscious of it. In fact, there's the Jackson Pollock. I'm not quite sure if it's a gravestone or just a tribute. It's in the Green River Cemetery in East Hampton. Yeah. And where he died in a car accident in '56. And this is a demonstration in front of MoMA. The young Turks were always complaining that MoMA wasn't really modern, that they wouldn't show the work of the people that were, my generation. So this was one of them. And
who's the one on the ladder? Yes,
that's Norman Bloom, who got to be on the cover of the book. Actually, Fred liked the way it worked. And it looks like he didn't fall off the ladder. At least I don't remember. Okay, this is 10th Street in the daytime. It was between, I guess it's 4th Avenue South and 3rd Avenue that all the galleries were. This is a group of people here. I'm trying to see who they are. Well, here's a 10th Street opening at night. This was the Tanager Gallery, which had a really good group of people. Moving on, this is de Kooning here with the white hair, and Lucy Freeman Sandler. She she may have retired. She was an art history professor at NYU and married to Irving Sandler, who was a critic who was very active, and he worked as much as he could to bring the publicity and light on the abstract expressionists. He fought the good fight, indeed. Fred also would photograph artists at home. That's Paul George's with his family. He had a loft on Broadway. It was actually, it may have been between Prince and Spring. And he lived and he worked there. This was before artists were allowed to live in lofts. And sometime later, the city enacted this AIR law. I don't know, maybe some of you may have worked to get it passed. Artists in residence, which for the first time permitted not just manufacturing, but residential use of the space. Here's a famous skeet ball. That's Jasper Johns throwing the skeet ball. And behind him is John Cage, Merce Cunningham, and Rauschenberg. Dillon's was on University Place. Dillon's was a bar on University Place that had the skeet ball. So after the Cedar had closed in '62, I think. No, it was earlier. They went to Dillon's. What else? A major meeting place was the Cedar Bar. The Cedar Bar was where you could go and if you spread out like that, you could hit anybody from de Kooning to Isamu Noguchi. You know, really a total John Chamberlain, just on and on. You could be sure of meeting a friend there. That's Noguchi, actually, the bald guy. And further up is Peter Grippy, and I forgot the other guy.
Big dinner party?
Yes, opening night. The artist who is not visible was Wolf Kahn.
Oh, I love this one.
Yes. Yeah, and he was married to Emily Mason, whose mother was a painter also, Alice Mason. And this was, if they could afford it, an artist would invite a nice group of people to help celebrate in Chinatown.
Which one was Wolf Kahn?
I don't see him here.
Okay.
He's not at the head of the table. Okay, and here are some pictures from parties. That was a New Year's Eve party at the club, and the people, Jimmy Cucchiara, Ted Jones was a poet, Franz Klein, Pete Martin, Harold Rosenberg was a very well-regarded art critic. He wrote for the New Yorker. But his heart was with the avant-garde. And in one of his first reviews, he began the term of action painting to describe what some of the abstract expressionists were doing, which had really now, I don't think anyone but old folks know where it came from. But he was married to a painter also, May Natalie Tabak. I don't think either of them are with us right now. Anyway, they were well regarded, very well regarded. And this was a party in Al Leslie's loft. That's Al Leslie jitterbugging with Dodie Muller, who was a painter. It was on East 20th Street. I don't remember the number, but you can see there was a crowd, and here he's pouring drinks, and I don't know who's being kissed goodnight, but somebody was. Okay, moving along here. This is Milton Resnick. who was a club member, and he was he spoke very well, and he was a real, an intellectual, a thinker, and he was often on the club panels where had really esoteric subjects like the tyranny of the new. I mean, what was that? Things like that brought out, almost fisticuffs. They all were people liked to talk, and they felt at home enough to discuss things that were very close to what they were doing. And Milton lived in a synagogue that is still there on Delancey Street. I don't remember whether it's on the corner of Allen. It's right past, there's a park, Sarah Delano Park. It's past there, and it's on the right-hand side if you're going to Brooklyn.
So he lived there because it was an apartment building, or they turned?
No, it was
he was
him.
An artist in residence.
He was married to a painter named Pat Paslow, who also was a club member.
She had her synagogue.
Say it again?
She had her synagogue. They each had their own synagogue.
So I've heard. I don't think I knew that at the time. Because there were two synagogues. I guess, I don't know where hers was.
It was nearby.
Really? There are a number of old synagogues.
They were abandoned.
Right, like the Eldridge Street Synagogue, which now is
Flourishing.
Thank you, exactly. Tom Hess was the editor of the Art News, and he wrote the introduction to the book. This was John Kennedy, who was the art critic for the New York Times. Hilton Kramer, who I don't remember whether he worked for a specific newspaper or whether he may have worked for the Times. Yeah. Irving Sandler, the critic, and that's James Schuyler, who I knew as a poet, but apparently he wrote about art also. Okay, this is Sandler at work. He seems to be taking notes about where the gallery he's in. Down here we have Frank O'Hara, a poet, really, but he had a day job as an assistant curator at MoMA. And Hans Hoffman, I believe that's in Provincetown. He had a school there, and many of the artists whose names I'm throwing around had taken classes with him. This is Lloyd Goodrich, who was, I think, the first director of the Guggenheim when it opened. Of the Whitney. Thank you. Whitney. Like it says. I'll be right back. Okay. And here's that's Mark Rothko with a cigarette. That's Guston, Philip Guston, and that's Robert Motherwell. This is Philip Guston.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. And this is Resnick, Milton Resnick again, and that's Pat, his wife, Pat Paslow.
While you're passing by this, let me just point out what's in here. Fred was the mailing list coordinator and doorman at the club for a long time, and these are actual postcards he sent. He also sent one to himself announcing what each of the events are. So you can look, you can see, James Brooks, William Dupuy, and Clement Greenberg discuss whatever it is, Friday, November 30th, 1956. And it's kind of cool to see these names and these events that they had and what they discussed. And below it is outlines from the book, some manuscripts from the book, and the original copy of the book, which is the black and white, in a 1991 second edition, which is the color one. So this is this all resulted in all that up there.
Tanemitsu. He had a real Japanese first name, I don't remember it. kind of miss you. Here's Larry Rivers. And,
What are you looking for?
That's Peter Grippy on the left. And on the right, I do not know. I have to give up on that one to get back to Okay, here we have Ruth Quigman, who had the, the misfortune to be in the car with Jackson. And she survived.
Oh, God, that's the woman.
She actually,
I think she's the girlfriend.
she actually took over Klein's studio after he died. And she was a painter, and she married his much younger guy, to me much younger, named Carlos Segunda, who, I don't know, maybe some of you know. And this, of course, is Lee Krasner, and I'm happy to say that at the New Whitney, which there's a tremendous picture by her, and it's so nice to see her getting the kind of recognition that usually would go to Jackson Pollock. So
His painting is on the opposite,
yes,
directly opposite.
yeah. But not only is it smaller, but also when you walk in, what you see is hers, and then you need to turn around. Yes, as a feminist. Exactly.
But they still have to say wife of.
Whereas they never say husband of. Someday. I don't know. That's Marisol Escobar. Her work is very visible. It was at the Met in she did wooden figures, like people standing in a classroom, or even with her face sometimes. And she had a show. I don't think she's still alive, at the Studio Museum this past winter. So her work was recognized.
Is that also her, right there?
No, that's Grace Hardingham. These two. She has a show now, I think, I was just reading about it, at the Brandeis Museum. It sounded very interesting, but it's closing, so another time.
The Brandeis Museum up in Massachusetts.
Yeah. Oh, this is Elaine de Kooning, who had been married to Mr. de Kooning, but anyway, won't go into that. Okay. Frank Stella. It's taken at the primary sculptures show that was a really groundbreaking exhibit of his generation. Yeah. His father had been a painter also, Joe Stella. I did not know him. Yeah.
I always used to say that.
It's funny, yeah. And, down here we have Alan Caprow, who was among the first of the artists who did happenings. And he had a lot of success. And, he finally went out to California and taught in Pasadena. But his events were at the Rubin Gallery, which was on, I think, East 3rd Street, 30th. Okay, and here Alex Katz is with his wife Ada and little, I don't know, boy or girl. He has an exhibit now at the Gavin Brown Gallery, which is it's in the far West Village. And I understand it's quite different. He had been known for painting his wife over and over, beautiful paintings, but he apparently is now doing different kinds of landscapes and so on that I plan to see hopefully this weekend. It closes on the 16th. That's Jane Wilson. She was married to John, maybe still is married to John Cooper, who was a critic and also now more of a photographer. and they lived on Tompkins Square in a beautiful townhouse. I don't know if they're still there.
Who is that?
That's George Beck. John Page taught at the New School, and George Beck, who's a painter, was one of his students. And although I don't think he was a musician, but a lot of the people who did happenings went to that class. It was exhibited in MoMA. They had a John Page exhibit with one of his silent things, and that was in it. Okay. More happenings. That was Jim Dine. He did a happening called Car Crash, and he thought it would be more visual to have his suit covered in blood. So he made this silver foil suit. And that was at the Moving Gallery also. We have these pictures are all of artists, whether it's Andy Warhol with his first show in New York at the Stable Gallery, with the Brillo boxes, tomato juice boxes, incredible paintings of Frank O'Hara, Milton Resnick's Pat Pasqua. She lived up in Harlem, and she was brilliant, and her work has now achieved great recognition, which is very much deserved. This is Ray Johnson. He was known for sending postcards to people that were like very mysterious. He was kind of a mysterious guy, and he lived in the Chelsea Hotel, and these were his pets. That was on St. Mark's Place, where 8th Street becomes St. Mark's Place, and now there's a lot of construction there. And the cube is gone, but this is the sculpture of it, but the cube is not in there, and I just threw that in. And there's Warhol at that same exhibit. This is Anna Wilkinson, who she was beginning to get a lot of recognition, but she unfortunately suffered from breast cancer, and it was discovered too late.
What was her name? Sorry. What was her name?
Hannah Wilkie. She once told me, I'm sure this is true, that she went to high school with Francis Ford Coppola in the Bronx. I never checked it out, but maybe. And moving along here to Ed Reinhardt. He was known for his black paintings and very subtle colors. His studio was on Broadway. If you stand on Washington Place, you can see the building. It has a great big window on Broadway. So if you're at Washington Square Park East and looking on Washington Place, there it is.
The resemblance is unbelievable.
He had exhibited on 10th Street in a small gallery, and his work has gone on. He still has work in museums and so on. Not all the 10th Street artists achieve the kind of recognition that the ones that I'm pointing out. Some were there, at least for now, and disappeared. And Ada Katz.
Or after 1961. When the book came out, the Village Voice was essentially one of the only places showing photos of artists and reviewing their work. So a lot of people would seek out Fred, and they would call the Voice and try to get their picture in the paper. And these are artists who are now all fairly well known. If anybody can name them all, you get a free bottle of wine. Is there anybody here who can name who those 10 artists are? 8 out of 10, you get a full bottle of wine. Other than you, Mom. You don't count. We'll start from here. This is Willem de Kooning in East Hampton in 1976. That's Franz Klein in the studio near the old homestead on 14th Street. That's Ed Ruscha, who's pretty well known. And what's the name of the guy with him? We just looked him up. Gerald Lang is with Ruscha. That's a guy named Jack Smith. He would make experimental films with Warhol. You see the first show that they have, you'll see works by almost every single one of these people in the show. There's films by Smith. There's paintings by Alice Neal, there's postcards by Ray Johnson, and the Whitney smartly doesn't have any soup cans. Everybody's seen the soup cans, but they have things that are representative of all these artists. As my mom pointed out, there's a huge Lee Krasner. There's an awful lot of stuff by Eva Hess, the woman on the top. There's Rauschenberg over here. There's Lee Krasner down here. There's Kenneth Nolan. Publicity-conscious individual in the city of New York in the 1960s was Andy Warhol. We would be sitting at home having dinner. My mother, my dad, me, and my little brother, the phone would ring. Hi, it's Andy. Is Freddie there? He wanted publicity. He was obviously, as we know now, very astute in terms of his business skills, in terms of getting attention, understanding what mass media and culture and public perception means to his bank book. So he would literally call the house and say, Freddie, come take my picture. And as a result, along with perhaps Billy Name and David Garr, my dad took more pictures of Warhol than any other photographer ever because they would cross paths at events, 3 or 4 or 5 nights a week. Andy and the two Johnson brothers, one died in TWA Flight 847 over Long Island. The other one is a pretty well-known interior designer now. That's Andy again with the Brillo. That's Andy and some of his superstars, Bridget Berlin, Viva, Susan Hoffman, and so on. They're waiting for Cecil Beaton to take some pictures of them. That's Andy at Castelli with some of his silver balloons. Andy, as you may know, managed for many years the Velvet Underground. They played many shows at the Dom on St. Mark's Place. Across the street was a thrift store that's still there called Trash in Vaudeville, and Andy went shopping in between breaks during the rehearsals, and my dad took a picture of him trying on a Sgt. Pepper jacket. Cheryl asked about the provenance of the pictures. When my dad started at The Voice, he was the photographer, and he would get paid $5 a picture. The Voice didn't overpay people. He bought his own supplies, he bought his own chemicals, he bought his own paper. He converted the bathroom into a darkroom. In 1975, when Rupert Murdoch bought The Voice, he said, okay, Mr. McDarrah, can I have my pictures back, please, now? And my dad said, fuck you. He said, I took the pictures, I paid for the pictures, I own them, drop dead. And to make a long story short, my dad essentially won. The Voice retains the right to use photos that were previously published to The Voice that my dad took, but my dad kept the copyright to every single thing he ever took in his whole life. His attitude was, I took it, it's mine. And if you don't want to pay what it's worth, you can't have it. There's a classic story. He got a call one day about 10 years ago from a museum in Seattle called the Jimi Hendrix Sound Experience. There's only one person on earth who was inside the Electric Ladyland studio and has pictures of Hendrix at that soundboard. It was Fred. They were doing a story about it for The Voice. So the museum called up and they said, we'd like to use that picture on a big poster when you walk into the museum. My dad said, great, $5,000. They said, we'll discuss it and call you back. My dad said, okay, that's a lot of money, Mr. McDarrah, $5,000. He goes, thank you, and he hung up on them. They called back. They said, okay, we'll pay you $5,000. My dad said, the price went up. It's now $10,000. And they were flabbergasted, particularly if I'm telling something that's not true. And So they said, well, I don't know if we can afford $10,000. My dad says, who designed that goddamn museum? Frank Gehry? He doesn't come cheap. Who was the financial backer for the museum? Let me see. Paul Allen. Didn't you start a company called fucking Microsoft? And you can't pay $10,000? F-U-C-K-Y-O-U. Slam. He hung down the phone. He attached a value to his work. If you didn't want it, you couldn't have it. They called back. They said, okay, we'll pay the $10,000. And my dad said, great, that's for 5 years of licensing. Every 5 years you pay me $10,000. And they said, what are you doing? This is ridiculous. My dad said, if you don't want the picture, find it somewhere else. They said, we will. My dad hung up. They couldn't find the picture. They called back. My dad said, you had an hour to call back. Doesn't Paul Allen own a watch? It's over an hour. But at that point, he said, you know what? We'll stop. So now, every couple of years, my mother gets a check from that museum for $10,000. Because my dad attached a value to his work, the same way he wouldn't give in to Murdoch, and he wouldn't give it to anybody else. If you didn't want the picture, or you couldn't afford the picture, don't find it someone else. As he came to learn over time, there was no one else. There's 3 shows this summer that have a lot of Warhol stuff. There's the Yoko Ono show at MoMA now. By virtue of hanging out in the Village and knowing Yoko before she knew John Lennon, and knowing Andy before he was famous, he acquired an unbelievable archive of things, and now it's valuable not only in terms of money, but more so in terms of its historical importance.
They knew that what he did with the pictures would never reflect badly on them. We never permit commercial use of the pictures to sell anything. Even though our licensing is handled by an agent, the agent knows if there's any commercial request, they have to tell us. And if we think it's tasteful and, all good things, we might agree, but generally we don't, because it's not worth it to break that trust. Because now it's, of course, foundations, people, states, but still, they trusted Fred. And
that's how he retained his access to people, because they knew he wasn't going to, there was no national enquirer then necessarily, but they knew he wasn't going to turn around and use the picture for whatever passes for nefarious purposes, or advertising publicity, or use the artist wouldn't like.